and I welcome you all to this EduTalk session at the Syed Ehsan Ali and Syed Maratib Ali School of Education at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Thank you for joining us today. I am Gulab Khan, Assistant Professor at the School of Education, and I would be your host and moderator for this session today. I feel very excited about this hosting and moderating this session, and this is for three reasons. First, this is the first ever opportunity that I'm hosting and moderating a session like this, and in a format like this, or in fact, in a format of any type for that matter. Second, and more happily so, I am reconnecting face-to-face with my friend Pablo Fraser in a long time, 8 years to be precise. Back in 2011, we both became class fellows in our PhD studies at the College of Education, Pennsylvania State University in the US. After we graduated, we didn't get much chance to interact in person or online, except for some occasional interactions on social media. So it is really refreshing with nostalgic feelings of our time in the US that I'm meeting with Pablo today. And third, the topic that Pablo will be speaking with us today is very close to my academic and scholarly heart. Professional learning networks and school leadership, it is what he will talk about. Speaking of PLNs or other similar concepts, for example, professional learning communities, schools as learning communities, or communities of practice, one very important element that comes to mind is relationships, how people relate to each other in schools, because quality and nature of relationships determine if and how teachers can collaborate to improve their practice. So models and concepts like PLN appear to be far more effective at addressing some of these important dimensions of instructional and leadership improvement, including setting the relationships right in schools, and in promoting a type of agency, a teacher agency, that can lead teachers to collaborate rather than compete, and help them focus on instructional improvement instead of anything else. So in that sense, I feel very excited that Pablo's study will give us important insights. So dear audience, it is my honor introducing Pablo Fraser to you all. Pablo is an education policy analyst for TALIS 2018 study at the OECD. Besides his work in TALIS, Pablo has also led OECD project on teachers' well-being and quality teaching. His research interests consist of the exploration, identification, and description of the current global trends in the development of quality educational policies. He has been involved in comparative and international research concerning teachers' professional development, teaching practices, and teachers' well-being. Pablo has a PhD with a dual mention in theory and educational policy and in international and comparative education policy from Pennsylvania State University in the USA. And a bachelor's degree in sociology from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. Pablo, thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. Before Pablo takes the mic, let me share the structure of the session. First, Pablo will share his study with us in about 20-25 minutes, and question and answer session will follow afterwards. Please hold your questions until then, or you can type your questions in the chat box, which Pablo will come to when he has finished his presentation. Or Pablo, if you would like to take the questions as you go along, it is your choice. So with that, Pablo, mic is yours.
Thanks, Krua, for that very nice introduction. And thanks to the School of Education for the opportunity to display some of the results of the type of studies that we do here at the OECD. For me, it's a real privilege to have these opportunities to talk in schools of education, universities, to talk with people that are passionate about education, who are practitioners or who are policymakers. This is, for me, really the instances that makes the work really come to light. So I want to share my screen to start the presentation. Give me just a second, please. I'm just going to from the beginning and okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Thanks. So as Gulab mentioned, I'm an analyst with Talis currently. I also work as co-acting head of the whole project. I have been working in Talis 6 years now. And the topic that I want to address today is the issue of collaboration, professional learning networks, and the role of the school leadership, particularly how can they foster an environment that can be conducive to these collaborative and professional learning type of practices. So I want to start with a reflection. This is a results of the latest survey that the OECD conducted on the responses to the COVID-19 crisis. So here you see a chart of the proportion of countries, OECD countries, that decided to have their schools fully open or fully closed during the COVID-19 crisis, and with some options in the middle. And you can see from the purple rectangle that a significant proportion of countries, OECD countries, decided to close schools, especially in the higher levels of education. And I think we have not yet grasped the implications that this has had. And still in some systems, schools are still remaining closed, and in other one, they're slowly open, but with some kind of a hybrid system. And we have not really reflected on what are the consequences that this type of actions are having to the teaching profession. And one angle that I think is particularly unexplored and not sufficiently discussed is the issue of teacher collaboration and relationships within the school. So we know already this is a topic that has been explored in the scientific literature for a long time, the importance of teacher collaboration for the dissemination of knowledge, for professional development, and also for retention, motivation, and job satisfaction overall. And we also know that school leaders play a key role to foster those conditions that encourage collaboration, that encourage communication. But the question is, what happens with collaboration where we pull out the physical environment where that collaboration happens? What happened where we stop seeing our colleagues face to face? And I think education system, from the conversations that I have engaged, are slowly starting to realize that this is a topic that we need to pay more attention to and how they could be impacted. Unfortunately, the data that I have from our tally study is from 2018. So it's prior to the COVID-19. So I cannot show you data of what's happening right now on teacher collaboration. Regardless, I think it's still helpful to understand what was the situation prior, so we know where could the situation be right now. And I think it still provides some interesting points of reflection. So let me just have a quick mention of what is this Talis survey that I keep mentioning on. This is the Teaching and Learning International Survey. This is the largest international survey currently existing, asking teachers and school leaders about their work. We ask questions about their practices, classroom practices, about the training, about the professional development needs, about their well-being, their satisfaction, and their overall opinions about their work. This is the third cycle that we have implemented the survey in 2018. Actually, we're currently working for the next cycle, which is 2024. So it's a periodic survey. And in each cycle, more countries have joined it. It's a survey aimed at lower secondary professionals, so lower secondary teachers, lower secondary principals, although some countries can have the option to also implement the survey in primary and upper secondary education. So the sample per country is 200 schools per country, and 20 teachers per school are surveyed. So these are the countries that participated in the last cycle. In green are those that were new to TALIS in the last cycle in 2018. So I think we have more or less a good coverage. Of course, there's some gray areas in Asia and Africa that would still like to go there. And we are actually, for the next cycle, there are new countries from these regions that are participating for the first time. So it's a slow process, but we hope one day more countries participate in TALIS to have a more comparative data on it. So this is TALIS. Okay, so let me just jump immediately with the data that I'm showing you. So all this data is based on responses from teachers prior to the COVID-19 crisis. So one key question that I would like to start is, how do teachers get exposed to collaboration? So one of the ways that we ask this is asking them if one of their professional development activities consistent in networking. And around 40% of teachers on average at the OECD stated that, yes, the professional development was paid in some type of professional network. Usually, for most countries, more experienced teachers participate in these activities than novice teachers. Novice teachers usually participate in course seminars. We can call it a little bit more passive type of professional development. And the more experienced teachers are engaged with more dynamic or active forms of professional development. Still, comparatively speaking, with other forms of professional development, this is one of the less frequent forms of engagement in professional development in network. So 40% can seem high, but compared to other forms, like I said, participating in a course or a seminar, are much more frequent. Participating in a course or seminar is over 90%. 90% of teachers say they have engagements. Also interesting. And here I make a comparison with the United States. We see that how many of the teachers that participated in induction activities, so these are new teachers that go to the school, how many of those induction activities consisted in some form of collaboration. And you see that on average, 60% that said, okay, yes, my induction was based on networking collaboration. It's quite high. United States is higher, quite more higher. And I think it shows you some particularities or some systems where these are more pronounced. Another form that we find relevant, but it's less frequent, is team teaching with experienced teachers, mentorship, for example. So we see from this data that collaboration happens, is a reality for many teachers that are exposed to induction or professional development, but not at the level than other activities. Please look at the first ones that we're seeing: plan meeting, supervision by the principal, courses, seminars, which are more like top-down type of forms of induction professional development. So these more active, horizontal ways of collaboration are less frequent. So here we hear from Consaio, a teacher in Portugal, about what are the type of activities that engage. And she mentioned this project that they have in her school in Portugal, in Lisbon, sharing of server building. And she tells a little bit that it's a practice to identify good practices, and they talk with their colleagues, what worked, what didn't work, what teachers did. And so this is the type of collaboration activities that we call deeper forms of collaboration, because there's a reflection on it. There's a component of a critical reflection with peer colleagues on it. However, this type of deeper forms of collaboration are rarer. So here we have this infographic that shows you the different forms that teachers collaborate with their peers. So 61% of teachers say that they regularly discuss the development of students with colleagues is high. Around half, 47%, they say that frequently engage with others. But you see on the right side, these deeper forms of collaboration are rarer. Only 28% says that they do team teaching, like the example of Consejo in the previous slide. Or only 9% they say that they do peer observation, which is like the most elaborated type of peer collaboration because it involves like an expert analysis of a class and getting back to a colleague. So these forms are rare. Here is the same data that I presented, but a little bit more broken down. So we divide the different types of professional collaboration between what we call exchange and coordination for teaching, which we consider to be like looser forms of collaboration. They are important, but they are more informal. They don't demand much time from teachers. Discuss with our colleagues about a particular issue, attempting conference, exchange teaching materials with colleagues. And this other set of collaborative practices we call professional collaboration. This is what I call the deeper forms of collaboration. And you see here, if you compare the two sets of activities, what we call professional collaboration are much more complex. Teach jointly as a team in the same class, participate in collaborative professional learning, engage in joint activities across different classes and age groups, and also other teachers can some provide feedback. So you see the green bar is the percentage of teachers saying that they do this at least once a month. And you can see that the green bar for the professional collaboration items is much more reduced than the green bar for the other practice. And it makes sense. It makes sense because, like I said, this professional collaboration type of practices are more complex and more time demanding. It requires a certain structure put in place. This is not as simple as talking with your colleague in the hallway. This requires having a schedule, having regular conversations with somebody, requires a plan. So as they are more complex, they are less frequent. But we know that this set of practices, the professional collaboration, are the set of practices of collaboration that really has the potential to make an impact. I think other interesting finding is the huge cross-country variation that we have for this particular set of items. So collaboration, for example. You see this, the blue bar is teach jointly as a team in the same class. So you see that you have more than 60% of teachers do this in Austria and in Italy. And at the lower end, you have the Czech Republic and the Russian Federation, which are the countries that have the lower percentage of teachers that do this. But if we look at other practice, for example, so other teachers class and provide feedback, for example, you see Kazakhstan, quite high. 60% of teachers in Kazakhstan say that they engage in this type of activities, while in Austria is 10% of teachers that they say that they do this type of practices. Engage in joint activities across different classes and age groups. We see that, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, almost 40% of teachers say they engage with activities. Or participate in collaborative professional learning. Here we see Shanghai, remarkably high on this aspect, and as well as Vietnam and the United Arab Emirates. So this is interesting for me because it shows you that it's not there's not a pattern, universal pattern of the type of collaboration. You see that in certain countries, a certain type of collaboration is more predominant than the other one. It speaks to certain idiosyncrasies, and it also speaks to the importance of unpacking what we understand by collaboration. We can go to international forums and talk with colleagues from different countries, and as the strategic collaborate, you say, yes, but we have different understanding of that. And I think this example explains really well by these different forms of collaboration. Also, a very interesting finding as well is that the higher the level of education, the less frequent are the practice of collaboration. So here we're using lower secondary as a benchmark. In the left side, you see a comparison between primary education and lower secondary. And you see that the blue bars are higher than the green dots. What does this mean? It means that teachers in primary education, there's a higher share of teachers in primary education that engage with collaborative practices than in lower secondary education. On the right side of the chart, you see the opposite part. The red bar is lower than the lower secondary circle. This means there is a lower share of teachers in upper secondary education that engage with collaborative practice than in lower secondary. This is interesting because you ask why? Why is that the case? Why the higher the levels of education, we collaborate even less? It can be an issue of infrastructure, for example, like primary education settings usually are smaller than upper secondary. There are less teachers in a primary school or primary education level, which can facilitate communication, can facilitate engagement with colleagues. And upper secondary education, usually a more complex structure. You have divisions, you have departments by subject. It may affect the frequency of dialogue and collaboration with other colleagues. But that's just a general hypothesis. The fact is that collaboration is important regardless of the level of education that you find yourself. So the fact that we see a decrease in the high levels speaks to something that we need to understand and explore a little bit more. Here I want to show you some results of a regression analysis that links school environment and professional collaboration. And here's where I want to add in this notion of school leadership. So here from Mary is a school principal from Finland, from Helsinki. And she says to us that I think that my role as a principal is to make ideas possible. I create spaces and opportunities for planning together. I encourage experimentation. So as Kula have said very well in the introduction, it's like school leadership has this role of creating an environment or provide a setting for this to happen. And also I want to pick up an idea that Kula have mentioned, the importance of relationship. So here we see the frequency of teachers engaging in taking part in the school decisions, and the percentage of teachers that they say there's a collaborative school culture. And it's quite elevated across the board, over 80% generally for countries. Although for some countries, teachers do not have that opportunity to be involved in school decisions. Why is this important? Because we see that those teachers that they say there's a collaborative school culture, or they say that, yes, I can rely on my colleagues, they are more likely to participate in professional collaboration. So this is a result of our regression analysis. It's a very powerful result. Basically saying that teachers, that they say that they're working in environments that are supportive, that are trustful, are more likely to engage in professional collaboration. Yeah. We see similar results between the percentage of teachers that they say that they participate in school decisions. So those teachers that participate in the school decisions are more likely to engage in professional collaboration. So this result already spoke about the school environment that is going on. And you see that the results are the same for each of the countries that participate in TAL, except for a few exceptions. The results are significant. We also see, of course, if a teacher participates in a network of teachers, if the professional development consists in a network of teachers, of course, that is to collaboration as well. But other interesting aspect that I found interesting is that those teachers that report a high degree of autonomy in the classroom, meaning they feel free, they feel in control of the decisions that they make in the classroom, of the direction they want the class to lead, also are more likely to engage in professional collaboration. So here we see like a profile of the teacher that we're looking in, how these different elements correlate between each other. Autonomy, working in an environment characterized by mutual support, leads to professional collaboration. Although the regression analysis were correlating one variable with the other, I really think it's a package. This was all reflecting a whole school environment that lead to that. I want to conclude the presentation just with some results explaining why is professional collaboration important. We see that those teachers that report engaging professional collaboration are more likely to be satisfied with the work. They also have a bigger sense of self-efficacy. They feel that they can do the work. And also, they're more likely to engage in what we call cognitive active practice. So these are type of classroom pedagogical practices that really shape the critical thinking of the students. So, like I said, teachers that engage in professional collaboration are more likely to report that they engage in this type of practices, high order type of practices. So, what all this result means for thinking ahead? I think first we need to talk about the importance of collaboration, and it is a cost-effective way to promote teacher learning, to promote satisfaction. But I will say that it puts forward the idea of the professionalization of the teacher workforce. Because one of the characteristics that defines a profession is a collegial body. And a collegial body is the ability to have a group of practitioners in the profession discuss the profession and set the rules for the profession. So that's what I think is key. Now, how we can foster collaboration? I think there is a top-down response and a more local level response. I think one from the perspective of education system is to encourage and maybe provide additional funding to create time to spend on quality professional development activities, because all these require plan. Like I said, the different forms of collaboration are more demanding on time. They are more complex. And it may involve some type of professional learning, professional development that will require some restructure. So that will need some additional financing. But also the local level, the school leaders, there's also an aspect of school culture here. And here the school leader has a key role of how to create an environment where communication, sharing, trust prevails. And there's no central system that can do the work for the school on this. This is the work of the people that are in that school to create a system of trust that can promote collaboration. We have seen, for example, other examples. Some schools have created a system of a collaboration champion, to have an appointee, a teacher who's in charge of really promote exchanges, collaboration, and dialogue with teachers, and some ideas. Some things to think ahead. There's a considerable variation in types of collaboration. Why? Due to different school organization, It's something to do with teacher training programs that the students teach. It's something to do with cultural patterns, what we perceive with collaboration. There's still a lot that we don't know about what the principal can do to facilitate collaboration. Well, maybe I'm not being fair with that statement. Yes, there's a lot of research, but there's a lot of practical granular information that we need to go deeper. And also the impact. What can the principal do that is more effective to promote collaboration in comparison to other type of practice? And finally, I want to finish like I started. We don't know yet how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting already established structures of collaboration. Are we going to see a revolution in this sense? There are people that are talking that the COVID-19 pandemic is really putting in the forefront the use of digital technologies, hybrid learning, and that would create a paradigm shift, not only for teaching learning, but also for how school staff relate with each other. So should now teachers and school leaders learn how to interact and work efficiently through digital means? And if so, what is the cost? What will be losing by losing presentiality? So I don't have the answers. I'm just raising the questions. So that's it. So thank you very much for giving this space to talk about this data. I'll be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Pablo, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. I think that has brought us some key learning and insights on how teachers and school leaders can collaborate, or there is a need for collaboration in schools to promote deeper learning outcomes in schools. So I would request members of the audience to ask questions. You can do that by unmuting yourself. If you could switch on your video as well, that would be much appreciated, but not as a mandatory requirement. But please, if you have questions, please do raise here. G. Saira.
So one of the points made earlier was that more effective, the areas like, for example, I think it was Austria where it was mentioned that a higher number of teachers teach jointly. What does that look like? Like what kind of a model is it when 2 teachers or 3 teachers teach jointly?
Yeah, I think that's, well, to start, I will start with the limitation. It's not a very fun way to start the answer. But the limitation of the quantitative instrument of TALIS is that we just have the heading of the answer. So we don't have much deeper understanding of what really means for Austrian teachers to work as a team teaching in classes. Now, that being said, in my conversation with countries and asking questions about, like, similar to the questions that you're asking, my understanding is basically is a type of a collaboration that is led by subject teachers on supporting each other, basically in type of activities like small group work with students. So they divide the classroom in subgroups, and they have different tasks for these subgroups. And by having 2 teachers in the class, they're able to monitor the class more effectively and respond to the needs of students. But this is one of the examples that I heard, and actually it's not from Austria. This was something that I heard from the United States. So that's one example of what team teaching can look like, but we don't have the information how this look like for all participating countries.
Okay. Any other question from the audience? Otherwise, I did pick up some of the questions that were typed in the chat box. Okay, Pablo, if you could respond to that question, or before that, there was one question from Safdar on Safdar, if you could, no, if you're there. So he's asking if this is safe. Sorry, Saifuddin. I'm sorry about that. Okay, he's asking, can we assume that this research is reflective of the teachers from Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka? Well, off the cuff, no, it is not. But at least, can there be any learning that we can glean? Because these countries are not part of this TALIS, right, Pablo? So what are some of the learning or messages, that these countries can take in terms of promoting collaboration in schools?
Yeah, thanks, Kulok, and thanks, Softa, for your question. Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, we don't have Sri Lanka, India, or Pakistan participating in TALIS. But I think the message still stands. I mean, from the evidence that we have collected from almost 50 countries, the message still stands about the role of collaboration in the professionalization of the teaching workforce. And I think that's the message I would like to rescue, and how for so many teachers across all countries, they see value in collaboration. And we see that it's tied with a job satisfaction, and I show you the evidence that the relation between professional collaboration and job satisfaction was positive for almost all the countries that participated in our study. And I truly believe that is something that should be encouraged at the educational central level and by schools to promote. Now, the results itself, I wouldn't try to speculate what is the situation in India or Pakistan about the type of practices. And this, without the data, I cannot go into it. So we can extrapolate the same results because we may know that you saw that there is a high degree of cross-country variation on the frequency levels of engagement. So we cannot see. I cannot speculate what type of collaboration goes in these places, but I do think that the message of collaboration, I would dare to say, is kind of a universal one, in the sense that I think is ingrained in the notion of a professional teacher. And I think the notion of a professional teacher have similar attributes regardless of where this teacher is in the world.
Thank you, Pablo. There's a question from Salman Javed Saab. I'm coming to you in a bit. So what is the correlation of these collaborations with learning of the students? If you were able to see that, if learning outcomes were variable in your models?
So TALIS does not use student data. It's solely a survey on teachers and their school leaders. That being said, there were two instances. There was one option in TALIS that we call the TALIS PISA link, where I imagine that you heard of the PISA study, which is an assessment to students. So what we do, we go to a PISA school and we survey the teachers in the school to see if there's any relation with those elements. And also, the PISA study has their own teacher questionnaire. There's not TALIS, they have their own teacher questionnaire. And what can we learn from that? Nothing very conclusive, I have to say, nothing very conclusive. We have seen some positive association for some countries, but nothing very robust that we can say, yes, without a doubt, collaboration has an impact on student learning. I will say that part of that is some limitation on the methods. What affects student learning is still a very complex question. And many times what is grasped at a survey doesn't do justice to what actually happens in the classroom. So the fact that we are not seeing something, it doesn't mean that it's not there. What is called a type 2 error. I think there's a lot more to be gained. And actually, in TALIS, we have another strand that we call the TALIS video study. about that we video record classrooms. And in that study, there's actually some very interesting stuff about the importance of socio-emotional support of teachers to the student and other elements like that. And maybe that's the direction that we should be taking to see more about the impact of collaboration of students.
Thank you, Pablo. G. Salmansa, please.
Oh, can everybody hear me? I'm on my earpiece.
Yes,
My
yes, we
sound
can,
clear?
please. Yeah, please go
All
ahead.
right.
Yeah, we can.
First, good, thank you. First of all, Dr. Gulab, to you, this is a wonderful collaboration that you put together, and we really thank you for that. And to Dr. Fraser. Dr. Fraser has been very patiently explaining us various details of his study, although I was like a jump in the sea to get a hold of what he's working on, but I got the bigger picture, yes. So Dr. Fraser, thank you very much for that. I would like to ask Dr. Fraser a simple question. That on his conclusion slide, he mentioned that hybrid learning is going to be the next frontier of education. That really tickles me in an exciting way. And I'm not sure whether COVID was the reason for that, or it became a factor and a fundamental element, as Dr. Fraser says, to comment. Could you, Dr. Fraser, could you please highlight for me or illuminate us, me particularly, that what do you mean by hybrid learning, and what kind of infrastructure are we looking at in a hybrid learning environment? If you got the question, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Salman, for your question. And I think, what I was saying, it was more of like an open question more than a statement, in the sense that I'm curious to see, because what we see from the data from the OECD countries is this approach in the post-COVID-19 world, when schools are starting to open again, to mix presentiality, asking students to come back, with some days still the student needs to continue from their home study. So that's what we call hybrid learning, that there's a mixture between students showing up to school and being in a classroom in front of the teacher and all that, what presentiality involves. With also a component that some of these days, the student has to be at home and work from a computer and connect from a computer to their teacher. And this is being done in some countries because due to safe regulations, they cannot have all the students coming at the same time because they have to meet a certain number of students per classroom. For example, my daughter, who's studying, she's studying virtually, she's in university. She studied virtually because they cannot come to the university because there's a quota to be met, and she has to stay at home. But what are the implications of the system? The implication of the system is that the teaching workforce, if this is going to last for a long time, will need to adapt to how to deliver quality instruction through hybrid methods. And if we didn't know really well what was effective teaching in presence, in the presentiality, if we were still trying to understand what was effective teaching in a regular classroom setting, what do we know about effective teaching through a computer? Nothing. We don't know nothing about this. So this is really uncharted territory. It can be exciting. I mean, digital tools have the potentiality for personalized learning. It provides a world of pedagogical potentiality that can benefit and enrich classroom instruction. But the fact is that we still don't know what works really well. And we took a huge jump now into that scenario. So of course we will need training of teachers, we need more research on what works, and a huge issue, resources. I mean, how many schools have the capability to sustain digital instruction, having the hardware and the software for it. Even if a country is quite developed, yeah, that might be the reality in their cities. What happened in the rural schools? What happened in remote areas? So I see a lot of challenges here in this new territory that we are all stepping in. I feel that COVID did not brought new issues. I think what it did, it rushed issues that they were already there, and it just emphasized it. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faisal. I think that, like you said, statement, and it needs to be delved into. Well, I'm sure, educated scholars like you will be looking into it. So thank you very much. Have a good evening. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. Thank you, Salman. So probably there's one question. What are the challenges to enact mechanisms to foster, if it came in your study, the challenges to foster deeper collaborative learning in the digital space, considering the disruptions caused by COVID?
Thanks for the question. Like I mentioned before, the study was done previous to COVID, so we cannot really go into that. And about the limitations, although the study did not prove itself, I think the major limitation is time. And I mentioned in my presentation, the deeper forms of collaboration are complex. It requires planning. It requires talking with colleagues. It requires working together on a schedule. When can I meet with you to talk about the situation? It has to be in non-teaching hours. Okay, but in my non-teaching hours, I also have to do marking. I have to do extracurricular stuff. If I have all the position in the school, if I'm a head of department, I will have to attend that. So what time do we meet? So that's a real limitation. Some systems have tried to deal that to actually have a school plan where they have a time in the week where it is the time where teachers talk with each other and see planning together. So my point to be made here is that I think informal ways of collaboration, like talking with colleagues or situation, they're quite rich and quite helpful. But we really need to create structure to make things sustainable. And that's it's hard. And it requires time involvement. So time can be resources in terms of additional time that requires compensation, or a more efficient or creative use of the school calendar as well.
This question was from Nasir, and I think it's a very pertinent question when it comes to countries like Pakistan, as where they would want to see more collaboration in schools. So I often tend to think about concepts or models like PLN, PLCs as Fermi's paradox of educational change, that there is so much kind of appeal in these models that they can cause educational change at the grassroots in so effective ways, but still we don't see these taking ground. So some of the challenges that you mentioned, but I was wondering, how does culture come into play, or the structure, the educational structure? For example, in Pakistan, we have a highly differentiated education system, right? We have private sector, we have public sector. Within private, there is a lot of competition and so on and so forth. So what do you think? I mean, does your study bring culture, structure of the system into focus? Pablo, are you with us?
Yes. I was taking a second to think about the question. Okay. We don't actually, the type of framework that the OECD works, culture is not something that is a very pleasant notion for the framework that we work at OECD, because culture involves kind of like a deterministic type of answer. Like, okay, this country follows a normative pattern that is embedded in the culture, so they cannot export other type of policy because it's not pertinent to them. So that being said, I do agree that culture plays a role. I do agree that that culture manifests in teacher training programs, school culture, school habits, and those elements that develops a certain way of teachers to engage. And we've seen cases, for example, even in successful systems, like for example in Finland, that teachers still collaborate with, struggle a little bit with teacher collaboration, because it's a system highly based in autonomy. And sometimes those notions goes against each other. I think there's a lot of contextual factors that it's not only culture, but also working conditions. So working conditions can be time, which I just expressed, but working conditions can be school stability, for example, working stability. What is the likelihood that you will engage in collaborative practice if you have a temporary contract? I recently did a study in Dubai, where Dubai, 90% of the schools in Dubai are private. And there's really there's a state regulation, of course, but they don't go into what's happening in the schools. And they have a huge level of rotation, these private schools. And when we talk with the teachers, they say that there's a high degree of competition, who get to stay. There's also a lot of factors there because your work visa is really tied to your job. So you want to stay, because if not, you leave the country. And there are many teachers that are coming to Dubai for a chance of having a better life. So all those elements that are working condition elements go against of building trust in a school, which I say is the prerequisite. If you don't trust your colleagues, how can you collaborate with them? You know, and I'm not talking about like being friends and being best friends forever. No, but a certain level of respect and trust, a notion that I can trust in you to tell you if I have problems. That if I tell you if I'm struggling with my class, that is not going to affect me negatively, and that you are willing to help me. And sadly, not all schools have that, because there are contextual factors that put values that goes against that type of spirit.
So yeah, I mean, with that point, Pablo, I think this also echoes what Faryal is saying here. Teachers, and I think you referred to some of these in your Dubai example, teachers sometimes don't collaborate because of the competitive threats, or just aren't comfortable because of sociocultural norms. But she's also giving a good example where in her school at one point it was made mandatory for every teacher to sit in at least 3 of other teachers' classes, you know, each term. So she's saying we all did in our free lessons. So I think policy also doesn't come into play. Culture does have a role to play.
And
yeah.
Gulab, and if I can, I know that we are reaching the time, but just a quick example on that. I don't know, the people here maybe are familiar with Andy Hargreaves, who is a scholar on teaching and the teaching profession. And I had a chance to talk with him when one of his visits to the OECD. And he's something for me that was fascinating, that be careful to impose good practice. Be careful to mandate good practice. Because I was very proud of the Chileans. I'm Chilean, and I was very proud of the Chilean system, that in the teacher evaluation system, we have an annual teacher evaluation for all teachers in the system, mandatory. That we have a module of evaluation that measures teacher collaboration. So we are assessing teacher collaboration. And I thought it was positive because I thought, oh, they are acknowledging something very important for student work in the teacher evaluation. They are recognizing something that is vital for teachers' work. And Hargreaves have a very different position, like, okay, but this would mean that schools are going to obligate the teachers to collaborate. and he saw that, and he's right, or like a top-down imposition. It doesn't matter that it's collaboration; it still is a top-down imposition. So he was advocating for no, these things needs to happen organically in a school.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge because, okay, where you draw the line, where if you are a school principal and you want to work with your teachers, how do you work with them in a way that you don't seem as like you're obligating them to do something like against the will? I mean, like I said, I think these discussions sometimes are more fascinating to raise questions, to reflect on issues, because that's why we are doing the work that we do, because we don't have the answers and we're trying to do the best to improve our education system.
With that point, Pablo, thank you. I mean, I feel, tended to really even mention this Campbell's law, right? What it says that you would not want to use any social indicator for, high stakes purposes. Otherwise, the whole idea or the essence of what you want to do will be, wasted. So I think organic growth of collaboration is what any system should really aim at, because we have seen that top-down mandates often they don't really work, and a good idea like professional learning network might really fail to achieve what it wants to. So with that point, Pablo, thank you very much for this very insightful, deep conversation. This actually brings us to the end of our today's Edu Talk with Dr. Pablo. On behalf of Syed Ehsan Ali and Syed Maratib Ali School of Education, I would like to extend our gratitude to Pablo and to you all for being here today. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again in our future Edu Talks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kulef, and thanks for the School of Education for the invitation. Thank you very much.
Our great pleasure.
Have a nice
Thank
evening.
you so much.
Bye-bye.
You too. You too. Bye.